Welcome to our deep dive into the myths and realities of the Wild West. The American Wild West has long captured the imagination of people around the world, thanks to legendary tales of cowboys, outlaws, and lawmen. From the iconic shootouts at high noon to the romanticized image of rugged pioneers taming the frontier, these stories have shaped our understanding of this fascinating era. But how much of what we know is rooted in truth, and how much is simply the stuff of legend? In this video, we'll explore the captivating narratives that have emerged from the Wild West, peeling back the layers of myth to reveal the realities that often go unnoticed. We'll take a closer look at figures like Billy the Kid and Wyatt Earp, examining their true stories versus the sensationalized versions that have been passed down through generations. By distinguishing fact from fiction, we can gain a clearer understanding of the complexities of the Wild West, including the cultural, social, and economic factors that shaped it. Get ready to challenge your perceptions and discover the real stories that lie beneath the surface of this legendary era. One of the most enduring myths about the Wild West is the belief that it was a chaotic and lawless place, where violence reigned supreme and every man was out for himself. While it's true that the frontier had its share of crime and conflict, the reality is far more nuanced. In fact, law enforcement played a crucial role in establishing order and creating communities in this rugged landscape. As towns began to spring up across the West, the need for law enforcement became apparent. Many towns appointed sheriffs or marshals to maintain peace and protect citizens. Notable figures like Wyatt Earp emerged during this time, becoming legendary for their efforts to uphold the law. Earp, in particular, is remembered for his involvement in the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral, which, while violent, was part of a broader effort to bring stability to a tumultuous environment. Contrary to popular media portrayals that often depict the Wild West as a free-for-all, historical records show that crime rates in many frontier towns were relatively low. Most residents sought to build a better life, and they understood that a sense of order was essential for their survival and prosperity. While shootouts and outlaws certainly existed, they were not the norm. By examining the role of lawmen in the establishment of towns, we can better appreciate the complexities of life in the Wild West. It wasn't just a lawless frontier, it was a place where communities worked hard to create a sense of order amidst the challenges of a new and often unforgiving land. Another enduring and iconic image of the Wild West is the dramatic high noon duel, where two lone cowboys face off in the dusty streets, hands hovering over their holsters as the town watches in tense silence. This romanticized portrayal, however, owes more to Hollywood and dime novels than to historical reality. In truth, gunfights were relatively rare events, and the concept of two men squaring off in a public showdown was largely a fabrication. The real Wild West was far more complex and regulated than these tales suggest. One of the most famous confrontations, the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, was exceptional precisely because of how rare such events were. Occurring in 1881, this shootout involved lawmen and outlaws in a violent, chaotic exchange that lasted only about 30 seconds but has since been immortalized in Western folklore. The fact that it is still widely remembered today highlights just how uncommon gunfights of this nature were. In most frontier towns, strict laws concerning firearms were the norm, not the exception. Towns like Dodge City, Kansas, and Tombstone, Arizona, imposed regulations that required visitors to check their guns with the local authorities upon entering town. These measures were intended to maintain order and reduce the likelihood of violent altercations. In fact, many of these towns had peace officers or sheriffs who diligently enforced these laws, creating a more peaceful environment than the chaotic, lawless image often portrayed in Western films. Violent crime did occur, but the typical conflicts were far less glamorous than the fictional duels on the silver screen. Brawls, knife fights, and drunken disputes were more common, and many of these altercations were resolved without lethal force. The myth of the Wild West as a place where every man settled his disputes with a gun is a powerful one, but it doesn't hold up against the historical evidence of a region that, while rough and often dangerous, was also governed by laws aimed at preventing such violence. When we think of the Wild West, it's easy to picture rugged cowboys and fearless outlaws, but the contributions of women during this era are often overlooked or misrepresented. Contrary to the myth that women were merely passive figures waiting for rescue, they played diverse and vital roles in shaping the frontier. From homesteaders to business owners, women were integral to the development of Western society. Many women took on the challenging task of homesteading and managing farms and ranches while raising families in harsh conditions. They were not just caretakers, they were pioneers in their own right, cultivating the land and contributing to the economy. Additionally, women established businesses, from saloons to boarding houses, proving that they were capable of thriving in a male-dominated environment. The importance of women's contributions to the development of the West cannot be overstated. They played crucial roles in building communities, fostering social networks, and ensuring the survival of their families. By debunking the myths surrounding women in the Wild West, we can appreciate their significant impact on this transformative period in American history. Women were not just bystanders, they were active participants who helped shape the frontier and laid the groundwork for future generations. The cowboy has become an enduring symbol of the American West, often romanticized in literature, film, and popular culture as a rugged individualist riding off into the sunset. However, the reality of cowboy life was far more complex and challenging than the idealized image suggests. Cowboys faced grueling working conditions, often spending long hours on the range herding cattle in harsh weather. The job was physically demanding and fraught with dangers, from stampedes to unpredictable animals. Life on the trail was not just about adventure, it involved hard labor, limited comforts, and the constant threat of injury or illness. Many cowboys lived in makeshift camps, relying on simple meals and the camaraderie of fellow workers to get through the tough days. Despite the hardships, cowboys hold a significant place in American folklore. They represent ideals of freedom, bravery, and the spirit of the frontier. Their stories have been woven into the fabric of American identity, symbolizing the quest for independence and the pioneering spirit that characterized the West. However, it's essential to recognize that the reality of cowboys was far more diverse than the lone hero archetype suggests. Actual cowboys came from various backgrounds, including Mexican vaqueros, African American cowhands, and Native Americans, each contributing to the rich tapestry of cowboy culture. The narratives of Native Americans during the Wild West era are often overlooked in mainstream discussions about this period. As westward expansion surged across the continent, it had profound and devastating impacts on Native American communities. The encroachment of settlers disrupted traditional ways of life, leading to the loss of land, resources, and cultural identity. Many tribes faced immense challenges as they navigated the complexities of a rapidly changing landscape. Key figures emerged during this time, leading efforts to resist the encroachment of settlers and protect their homelands. Leaders like Sitting Bull of the Lakota Sioux and Geronimo of the Apache became symbols of resistance, fighting against the injustices faced by their people. Their stories highlight the resilience and determination of Native American communities in the face of overwhelming odds. At the same time, some tribes adapted to the new realities brought about by westward expansion. They engaged in trade, negotiated treaties, and sought to coexist with settlers, often finding ways to blend traditional practices with new influences. This adaptability showcases the complexity of Native American responses to the challenges of the era. The American West was far more diverse and culturally rich than popular culture often portrays. In addition to the commonly depicted white settlers, the region was shaped by the significant contributions of various ethnic groups, each playing a vital role in its development. African Americans, many of whom were freed slaves, sought new opportunities in the West, working as farmers, cowboys, soldiers, notably in the Buffalo Soldier regiments, and even founding their own communities. Chinese immigrants, initially drawn by the California Gold Rush, became instrumental in building the Transcontinental Railroad, enduring harsh conditions and discrimination in the process. Mexican vaqueros, whose horsemanship and cattle herding techniques laid the foundation for much of cowboy culture, were deeply embedded in the ranching and agricultural economy of the West. Their influence on language, clothing, and cowboy traditions is still evident today. Native American tribes, who had inhabited these lands for centuries, played a central role in the history of the West, though their experiences were often marked by hardship and conflict. They maintained complex societies and trade networks long before European arrival. As settlers encroached upon their lands, Native Americans were subjected to violent displacement, broken treaties, and decimation through disease brought by colonizers. Despite these adversities, Native American cultures have endured and continue to influence the region's cultural fabric. Together, these diverse groups contributed to the unique, multifaceted identity of the American West, a reality often overlooked in the mythologized, homogeneous portrayals in film and literature. The California Gold Rush of 1849 is frequently romanticized as a golden era of sudden wealth and limitless opportunity, where adventurers and prospectors struck it rich by simply plucking gold from the rivers and hills. However, the reality was far more complex and often harsh. While a handful of individuals did manage to discover significant amounts of gold, thereby achieving the dream of immense wealth, the vast majority of those who traveled to California with hopes of fortune were met with disappointment. Many found nothing more than a few flakes of gold or came away entirely empty-handed, despite months or even years of backbreaking labor. For these miners, the dream of instant wealth quickly turned into a struggle for survival. They faced harsh and unpredictable conditions, including severe weather, difficult terrain, and the constant threat of illness or injury. Prospecting was not only physically demanding but also financially draining, as tools, supplies, and food were often exorbitantly priced. A considerable number of hopeful miners ended their journey in debt, having spent far more on their endeavors than they ever managed to earn from the gold itself. In contrast, it was the merchants, hoteliers, and service providers who truly profited from the gold rush. Opportunistic entrepreneurs seized the chance to supply miners with essentials like food, clothing, equipment, and shelter, at highly inflated prices. Businesses selling everything from mining tools to boots thrived, as miners had little choice but to pay whatever was asked. The gold rush also sparked a rapid growth of towns and infrastructure around mining areas, transforming once remote regions into bustling hubs of commerce and activity. While a few mining towns flourished and some individuals did strike it rich, many miners left the gold rush not with fortunes but with a profound sense of disillusionment. The dream of gold often gave way to poverty, financial ruin, and, in many cases, abandonment of the very land they had once viewed as a path to prosperity. For most, the California Gold Rush was not the romantic tale of adventure and wealth but a sobering lesson in the unpredictability of fortune. Contrary to the romanticized image of the Wild West as an era stretching over centuries, the period we commonly refer to as the Wild West was relatively short-lived. Most historians agree that its peak occurred between the end of the Civil War in 1865 and the final years of the 19th century. During this roughly three-decade span, the American frontier was characterized by lawlessness, rapid territorial expansion, and the clashing of diverse cultures, from Native American tribes to European settlers and newly freed African Americans seeking new opportunities. However, by the early 20th century, the landscape of the West had drastically changed. Many of the once lawless frontier towns, known for their saloons, outlaws, and shootouts, had evolved into more structured and urbanized communities. This transformation was driven by a series of technological and social changes that swept across the region. The railroad, in particular, played a pivotal role in connecting the once remote and isolated Western territories to the rest of the United States, enabling easier transportation of goods and people. With the advent of new communication technologies like the telegraph and later the telephone, the vast, untamed West became more integrated into the national fabric. At the same time, federal law enforcement became more present, and local governments gained greater control, reducing the prevalence of lawlessness and vigilantism. As farming, ranching, and mining communities flourished, the region became more stable and economically developed. This marked the end of the era of open frontier life, where vast stretches of land remained unsettled, and the West became increasingly settled and industrialized. The romanticized image of cowboys, outlaws, and the wide-open prairie gradually faded into myth as the American West entered a new phase of modernization and urban growth. The reality of the Wild West was far more nuanced and complex than the myths that surround it. While it was undoubtedly a time of expansion, adventure, and challenge, it was also marked by a growing legal system, diverse communities, and significant contributions from groups often left out of traditional narratives. By understanding the myths versus the reality, we can gain a deeper appreciation of this fascinating chapter in American history, one that was wild, but not in the way Hollywood would have us believe.